Cześć, mam na imię Edward, jestem z Australii i mieszkam w Polsce od ponad 4 lat. Mój polski jest chyba na średnim poziomie. Rozumiem prawie wszystko. Czytam bardzo dobrze. Mówię trochę gorzej, ale wystarczy na co dzień. Jakieś zakupy w sklepie, umawianie przez telefon, na przykład wizyty do lekarza, wizyty w urzędach. Wystarczy na to. Więc dziś chciałbym opowiedzieć Wam o tym, jak uczyłem języka polskiego, ponieważ korzystałem z nietypowych metodach. So I'll switch to English now. As I was saying, I don't really like the typical traditional ways of learning a language through textbooks, through repetition, through grammar. I find that really kills my motivation to learn a language. Instead, I learned using methods that a child would use when they're first learning to speak. So basically, listening to a lot of that language and reading a lot. Reading children's books, for example. Later, I learned that there's actually a term for this style of language learning. It's called comprehensible input. So today I want to just tell you about those methods, and I'll break this video into levels because it's very important that you use the correct method at the correct stage that you're at. Like, you can't just pick up a book and start reading if you're at an absolute beginner stage. You need to first learn, I would say, 500 words. You need a base level of vocabulary before you can even pick up a children's book. So starting with level 1, I used Duolingo, of course, for only the first few weeks. This is the thing that I want to emphasize. My opinion is that Duolingo is good only for getting that base vocabulary, maybe a few hundred words, and that you shouldn't spend more than like 1 month doing Duolingo. So like if you're doing Duolingo for 30 minutes a day, let's say in 1 month you've got 15 hours of Duolingo, definitely you don't need to go through the whole course. I think I only went through 1/3 of the Polish course in Duolingo, and that got me those, like, I'm guessing around 500 first words so that I could start understanding some simple texts. Yeah. My main point is, don't get stuck at the Duolingo stage. Move on as soon as you can to reading simple texts, reading children's stories, and specifically, I used an app called Link. This is an app made by a famous polyglot, Steve Kaufman. He speaks many different languages, and he's also a fan of this comprehensible input method where you just try to absorb as much of that language as you can. And the concept of the app is very simple. It's basically got a lot of short stories preloaded on it at any level of Polish. So even if you're a beginner at A1 level of Polish, you'll be able to find some short stories that you can read. And as you're reading these short stories, any word that you come across that you don't know, click on the word and the translation will come up. And then you're able to save that word as well to flashcards that you can revise later. And I have to say, this was the biggest game changer for me, this app, Link. Without it, I don't know, I think I would definitely struggle for a lot longer in learning words. I think with Link, that's when my understanding just shot up, when I was actively using this app over a period of maybe like 3 months. I just started being able to read things outside, started reading menus, started reading all over the place thanks to my vocabulary growing very quickly. Because the other thing about reading stories is that once you come across some word, you see that word again rather frequently. Just naturally, through the fact that it's natural language, you will come across the more common words in the language, the more commonly used words, more often, right? And you would encounter the less common words less often. So in a way, it's sort of organically driving towards learning precisely what you need to learn to understand most things in day to day. I hope that makes sense. So I definitely recommend Link as a great way to start reading and start gaining vocabulary. After that, I sort of moved on to a stage 2 of reading, a more advanced reading, where I didn't need to translate so often using Link, so I started reading things outside of Link. And I started with children's books and comics. So a lot of you might have read Asterix, especially if you're from Europe, maybe. This is a very popular series of comic books. It's a bit old now, but it follows the adventures of Asterix the Gaul, this little village that rebelled against the Roman Empire. The humor is actually very adult-friendly, I guess. It's not too childish at all. It actually has a very witty and clever plot and jokes, and it's been translated into many different languages because it was very popular at the time, like maybe in the 90s it was extremely popular, and even the jokes translate quite well. So I highly recommend the Asterix comics. I'm sure you can find these in any language that you're learning in any country, and you'll have a good time learning from these. And the reason that I recommend learning from comics as well is because you have additional context. You can see what's going on the picture. So if you don't know a word, you can guess from the rest of the sentence, but you can also guess from what's going on in the image. And that memory of that image will also help you memorize that word. So that's a very powerful and underrated way of learning language, I think, is reading comics. If you're looking for some comics that are actually Polish, then I recommend the Witcher series, Wiedźmin, right? Which is, if you're not aware of this, there's a famous game called The Witcher, and it's made by a Polish game studio, and it's based on a series of fantasy books written in Polish by Andrzej Sapkowski, a Polish writer, and it draws on Polish and Eastern European mythology, right? So I highly recommend the Wiedźmin comics, not the books at a more advanced level, yeah? Especially because they have a lot of words that you just won't encounter in the day-to-day. So it's not the most practical way to learn Polish because it's based in the Middle Ages. But the comics are definitely simple enough to read, and they're quite beautiful and quite entertaining. And then finally, something that I really enjoyed in my childhood is various science books that are made for kids. This one, I picked it up at an Empik. I just saw it one day, and I realized I don't actually know any terms about cars. I was actually thinking about buying a car here in Poland, and I realized I don't know words like brakes, steering wheel, and this book taught me all of those things, and also parts of the inside of a car. And it's just a very entertaining way to learn a language. I mean, I love all of these illustrations. It's just so fun, and I don't think that as adults we're above this. This is really fun to read. I mean, look at this illustration. It's so good. The cross-section of a car, everything labeled, all the parts labeled and written in a language that would be understandable for a child. And also the image will help you memorize those words. So this is great. I mean, I even recommend buying this exact book. If you want to buy this, it's called Samochody i ich fascynujące silniki, Cars and Their Fascinating Engines by Dan Zetwoch. But yeah, you can buy this from Empik, the bookstore. So that's about it for reading. You get the idea. Start from Link and then progress onto children's books, comics, and then finally more advanced reading. You can also try reading Reddit Polska, for example, except just be aware that people don't always speak the correct way there and that there will be a lot of slang. It can be very difficult to understand as a beginner. At this point, you should know a lot of words. You're able to read things, and at this point, you should definitely increase your listening practice. You should be able to listen to most things, and your main problem here is not about learning new words, it's about picking apart the words that people are saying, right? To listen to a sentence and understand which sounds are the individual words, because in the beginning, you listen to a sentence and you're not even sure where one word starts and where another ends. So at this point, YouTube and podcasts. And I have to give a massive shout out to the number one podcast that helped me the most. It's Mr. Real Polish, Piotr from Mr. Real Polish. His pronunciation is so good. He speaks slowly. He doesn't speak English at all in his podcasts. And he makes podcasts about a variety of different interesting topics. But he will speak in a way that is just so good for language learners because he covers the same ideas, he rephrases them several times. He says 2 or 3 sentences. If you didn't understand the first way he said it, he will rephrase it. And eventually you will understand, and you will understand without looking up any translations. But yeah, highly recommend Mr. Real Polish. And then also just go ahead and start consuming as much Polish content as you can on YouTube. Check out Netflix, check out some Polish shows on Netflix, and make sure that you're not using English subtitles. Use only Polish subtitles, because it's impossible to watch a Polish show and have the English subtitles showing. You won't listen to the Polish. You'll just be reading the English. This is not a good learning method at all. Turn on the Polish subtitles and watch it in the Polish language. Read along as the characters are speaking, and your level of understanding will shoot up. And finally, at this stage, you should be pretty advanced in listening. You understand most things that you watch on Netflix shows, on YouTube and things like that. You definitely want to focus on the speaking stage. You got to speak to native Polish speakers. And I'm not saying go out to shops or anything and talk to people in public, that you're not going to get enough practice that way. You need a tutor. I found a tutor on italki, which is this platform where language tutors list their services. You can see their reviews, you can see a little video where they introduce themselves, and you can hire them through this platform. There are two types of tutors on italki. There's I forgot what it's called, but sort of an informal teacher. So it's just a native speaker with whom you can have casual conversations. And then there are actual teachers, qualified teachers. For me, I spent a lot of time just talking to a native Polish speaker. And they would correct my mistakes sometimes, but it was more about just trying to speak, just trying to express myself, right? Rather than actual structured grammar lessons. After that, finally, I really wanted to understand the grammar, and I did hire an actual qualified language teacher. And she actually got me to do grammar lessons, and each of our conversations had a certain thing that we were focusing on, expressing certain things, and it was much more like exercises in this language. Once ChatGPT came out, I started using that to learn Polish, and specifically for writing. You can just have entire writing conversations with ChatGPT, and it will correct any mistakes that you make. It will explain ways that you can phrase things differently that are more like how native Polish speakers would phrase it, rather than how you translate it in your head. Yeah, ChatGPT is a total life hack. It's almost like having a native speaker to talk to correct your every mistake. So I definitely recommend that, and definitely the paid version of ChatGPT. So that's about it for the video. To summarize, those are the levels. Learn your first 500 words using Duolingo or flashcard type apps. As soon as you can, move on to reading short stories. The app I recommend for that is Link. After that, you can move on to reading physical books, comics especially, then listening, YouTubes and podcasts. The #1 podcast I recommend is Mr. Real Polish. And then finally, speaking. Go to italki, hire a native speaker there if you just want to have conversations, or hire a qualified language teacher if you want to have a more structured approach in grammar lessons. I hope someone finds this video useful. Please leave a like if you did. And if you have any questions, leave a comment below. See you next time.